Hey Neppers, it's me, Wild Neptune. Hope you all are having a very Merry Christmas. This video is going to be all about the best present you can ever get, Sereniel. And here she is. So this video going over her cards, her partners, and everything else regarding her. She is, if you haven't heard already, very strong. She is going to be 100% best in slot for the second half of the Great Rift. See right here, I've gotten over 1,000,000 points using my kind of a picky team, but actually a pretty good team. Definitely think I can push with the team I have here for higher scores, which is optimized a couple of my decks a tiny bit here, but that video will be for another day. Today though, just a quick guide on how you might want to build and tailor your Sereniel to your needs. Sereniel is designed to quickly deplete the enemy's tenacity bar in order to refill your attack power and do even more damage. She does this by having a special new buff called Afterglow. It's not really a buff, it's like Decibel or one of those stack things that Will-O-Wisp and stuff like that will appear underneath the character's icon. And Homing Laser right here, you see has Afterglow, so it gives plus 1 tenacity damage to attack cards. Also, if the enemy is already in Ravage, it would do 50% more damage, so you still get an effect even if the enemy is already ravaged. And a lot of your cards will have this Afterglow. Some of them can lose Afterglow though in certain epiphanies, so we will find out about that also. So first of all, let's go over her cards. Her basic cards, she has 2 Pulse Fires. It's just a basic damage card, has a 50% chance to create a Homing Laser L. So Homing Laser L is simply a card with exhaust 2. Simply means you use it twice and then it disappears from your deck. It does some damage and it also has 1 Afterglow. So if you keep spamming these, you will keep perpetually replacing your Afterglow when you spam these 0-cost cards, and you will be spamming them because on Ravage, you move them from the graveyard to your hand, which is a very powerful effect. So the way that her cycle goes is that you spam a bunch of cards, like you create some of these homing lasers, you spam a bunch of them, you ravage the enemy, and then you get a lot of them back, and you spam some more. So very fun playstyle overall. Her shield is just a shield. Nobody really uses this card, so this is the easiest card to just get rid of. Now on to her epiphany cards. Let's start off with the first one, Homing Laser, a 0 cost, does some damage, has 2 Afterglow, and on Ravage, it moves from the graveyard to your hand, so it's basically a better version of the Homing Laser L's that you generate. Why the bad ones have the L, I don't know, maybe lesser is my opinion on that. So let's see what the epiphanies are and go by one. I think each of these have their benefits and downsides overall. So let's be honest here. A lot of these are just upsides. But the first one is going to be on Ravage, move the hand. So same thing. And destroy, add 1 hit. Keep in mind that this one loses the Afterglow, so you won't get the Ravage from this card, at least the bonus Ravage. So add 1 hit on destroy is pretty good. It means simply if the target's already in Ravage, or if the target got ravaged by this card, you just get another free hit, which is pretty nice actually. I think this one is okay. I'm not quite sold on it quite yet, because sometimes the Ravage is just more important, given the Afterglow is just a little bit more important than the add 1 hit, especially when the Afterglow also gives you more bonus damage to other cards, which can also be beneficial. So adding 1 hit here, it's nice, but maybe not the best thing ever. The second one here, it actually gets a bonus Afterglow, and the rest is the same. So remember, the initial version only has 2 Afterglow. This one will have 3, otherwise the same card. Just a strict upgrade to the card, albeit a kind of minor one. This one, I think, is actually one of the better ones overall. The only problem is that it costs 1, so if you can manage to get an epiphany here that makes this cost 0, if it exists, I'm not quite sure. Some cards seem to not be able to get certain epiphanies overall, so I'll have to see if this one can get it. But if it can, and it's a zero cost one, well, this thing is pretty bonkers, because creating 2 homing lasers in the discard pile is extremely powerful. Because remember that when you ravage the opponent, well, you get these back right away into your hand to use again, and just to increase the damage even more. So right now at 1, it can be a little bit clunky to use, I would say. I will say, however, that in practice, using her a lot, especially in the new Great Rift, I often have come into times where I just end my turns with too much AP. I have too much AP, and you can probably make do with some cards that cost a little bit of AP now, instead of just having 0 cost. So maybe not even the worst thing. This is definitely one that, if you get a couple that don't seem that good, and you're unsure about the 1 cost, take a try in this one, because it might surprise you, especially when you have dedicated decks that can just generate more and more AP. The next one here, I think people will like this one quite a bit because of its consistency, and I do think that this is either the best or tied for the best one. So it loses an afterglow and a little bit of damage. However, on Ravage and or I guess it says or, but it's really end, at the start of turn, move to the hand, which means that you always start with this in your hand, basically no matter what, once you use this card. I don't actually know if you have to use the card or if it appears right away. I haven't really checked that out. I have picked this card, and just getting it into the hand every single time is very beneficial, because it just gives that 1 afterglow for free and can really start your snowball effect overall. The final one is going to be Homing Laser, same thing, but this one moves all Homing Lasers in the graveyard to your hand. I'll be honest with you, this one probably is the weakest one, or at least the one that relies on the most synergy with another card. So there is another card we'll look at, which increases the exhaust of Homing Lasers from 2 to 4, and I feel like if you want to use this one, you really have to get the one that increases the exhaust of these cards. Otherwise, you don't really need it, because you're already moving all of these from your graveyard to your hand anyway when you tenacity break the opponent. Now, yes, you can do some really combo-ish things by breaking multiple bars, by using Selena, then using this and spamming even more attacks. You know, maybe there was like an achievement to do something like use 100 attack cards in 1 turn. This is something that you'd want to use it on, but otherwise, this one is definitely a little more trickier to use, I would say. So, again, not a bad choice, but not as flexible, in my opinion. So next up is Plasma Missile. It does some damage, it does half bonus tenacity damage, and if the target was not ravaged, we'll activate this card 1 more time. So let's take a look at the epiphanies. The first one does a little bonus damage, it does full bonus tenacity damage, and it also does it has not been ravaged, activates 1 more time. So you look at this, you see, okay, well, yeah, sure, it does a little more damage, and you hit the full tenacity bonus, but the bonus is not that good, right? Well, you say that, however, all the other cards loses the activate 1 more time. And now why is that important? Well, activate 1 more time is not 1 more hit. It is activate 1 more time. Which means that any epiphany effect that this card has will proc twice. So, if this card has something like draw 1, it will now draw 2. If it has mark 2, it will mark 4. If it has vulnerability, it will do twice the vulnerability, and so on. So, depending on the epiphany you get on this card, you can actually get a pretty strong 1-cost card there. The next one will simply do some more damage with each tenacity decrease on the target, max of 10, because I'm assuming that 10 is the max tenacity that an enemy actually has. So this will actually get to be a pretty big burst spell. The thing is, though, is that it's not a multi-hit attacker, it's just still 1 hit, which does hold it back, because a lot of the really, really strong burst spells right now are actually multi-hit attacks, because increasing each hit by an attack power or by a percentage is usually a lot stronger than increasing a single card, but still, again, not a bad card to have. The next one is going to be 2 Instinct Weakness, and, more importantly, 60% damage amount to Homing Laser for 1 turn. The damage on this one is the same, so you don't get the damage bonus. And I'll be honest with you, the Instinct Weakness is not really that important, because a lot of fights where you're going to bring Sereniel, they're probably weak to Instinct anyway. Even if they're not, it's not really that big of a deal overall. Simply what this means is that for the next 2 Instinct cards that are used against it, it will attack it as if it was weak to Instinct cards. Now, Homing Laser, though, 60% damage for 1 turn is absolutely nuts, because remember, Homing Laser is by far the most common card you are going to use for this. And it does apply to also Homing Laser L, so these are just all the Homing Laser variations and Homing Laser L that it applies to. So it's really very possible that you could be using like 5, 10, 20 homing lasers maybe in a single turn sometimes, and getting a 6% bonus on every one of them is extremely powerful. The next one is simply going to be create 3 homing laser Ls in your draw pile. You lose the tenacity bonus, but you do get 3 more homing laser Ls. So in some setups where you just want to create as many homing laser Ls as possible, this can be a pretty strong ability. Now, I would have caution with this one though, because you don't have ways to quickly exhaust your homing lasers, and they can get clogged up in the deck. Make sure that you do have a way to get rid of them quickly and pretty cheaply, and we'll get to that a little later on when we look at another card. Finally, we have an upgrade card, which is a unique one. First of all, it has an effect that it does 50% more damage to random enemy. Just the 50% damage to random enemy at the end of the turn, which is kind of a nothing effect. I kind of think they were just wondering what they can add to this card, and they added this to it. But the real thing is 30% more damage to homing lasers move from the hand for 1 turn. Now, this is interesting because you do lose the attack on the card, which, unlike some other characters, losing this as an attacking card can actually have some downsides. Now, the 30% damage amount, though, is not 60. However, it's basically always active because, you're going to be moving cards from your graveyard or your deck to your hand basically all the time. So while I do think this is probably the worst one out of the 4, maybe the second one is also not quite as good, it is still a good card to pick up. So next up is Plasma Missile. It does some damage, it does half bonus tenacity damage, and if the target was not ravaged, we'll activate this card 1 more time. So let's take a look at the epiphanies. The first one does a little bonus damage, it does full bonus tenacity damage, and it also does it has not been ravaged, activates 1 more time. So you look at this, you see, okay, well, yeah, sure, it does a little more damage, and hit the full tenacity bonus, but the bonus is not that good, right? Well, you say that, however, all the other cards loses the activate 1 more time. And now why is that important? Well, activate 1 more time is not 1 more hit. It is activate 1 more time. Which means that any epiphany effect that this card has will proc twice. So if this card has something like draw 1, it will now draw 2. If it has mark 2, it will mark 4. If it has vulnerability, it will do twice the vulnerability, and so on. So depending on the epiphany you get on this card, you can actually get a pretty strong 1-cost card there. The next one will simply do some more damage for each tenacity decrease on the target, max of 10, because I'm assuming that 10 is the max tenacity that an enemy actually has. So this will actually get to be a pretty big burst spell. The thing is, though, is that it's not a multi-hit attacker, it's just still 1 hit, which does hold it back, because a lot of the really strong burst spells right now are actually multi-hit attacks, because increasing each hit by an attack power or by a percentage is usually a lot stronger than increasing a single card, but still, again, not a bad card to have. The next one is going to be 2 Instinct Weakness, and, more importantly, 6% damage amount to Homing Laser for 1 turn. The damage on this one is the same, so you don't get the damage bonus. And I'll be honest with you, the Instinct Weakness is not really that important, because a lot of fights where you're going to bring Sereniel, they're probably weak to Instinct anyway. Even if they're not, it's not really that big of a deal overall. Simply what this means is that for the next 2 Instinct cards that are used against it, it will attack it as if it was weak to Instinct cards. Now, Homing Laser, though, 60% damage for 1 turn is absolutely nuts, because remember, Homing Laser is by far the most common card you are going to use for this. And it does apply to also Homing Laser L, so these are just all the Homing Laser variations and Homing Laser L that it applies to. So it's really very possible that you could be using like 5, 10, 20 homing lasers maybe in a single turn sometimes, and getting a 6% bonus on every one of them is extremely powerful. Next one is simply going to be create 3 homing laser Ls in the draw pile. You lose the density bonus, but you do get 3 more homing laser Ls, so in some setups where you just want to create as many homing laser Ls as possible, this can be a pretty strong ability. Now, I would have caution with this one though, because you don't have ways to quickly exhaust your homing lasers, and they can get clogged up in the deck. Make sure that you do have a way to get rid of them quickly and pretty cheaply, and we'll get to that a little later on when we look at another card. Finally, we have an upgrade card, which is a unique one. First of all, it has an effect that it does 50% more damage to random enemy. Just the 15 damage to random enemy at the end of the turn, which is kind of a nothing effect. I kind of think they were just wondering what they can add to this card, and they added this to it. But the real thing is 30% more damage to homing lasers move from the hand for 1 turn. Now, this is interesting because you do lose the attack on the card, which, unlike some other characters, losing this as an attacking card can actually have some downsides. Now, the 30% damage amount, though, is not 60. However, it's basically always active because, you're going to be moving cards from your graveyard or your deck to your hand basically all the time. So while I do think this is probably the worst one out of the 4, maybe the second one is also not quite as good, it is still a good card to pick up. The next one is Shining Core. It simply creates some homing lasers in your hand. So the first epiphany is going to be nobody's surprise, create 3 homing laser Ls. So yes, just 50% better. Still really good. Just use this, spam these 3 homing laser Ls, ravage the opponent, use more homing laser Ls, and just keep getting those big damage in. Next one, you'll create 2 homing lasers, but you'll increase the exhaust of these ones you create by 2. Like I said before, this one I think is especially good if you want to combo it with the homing laser that moves them from the graveyard to the hand, because you have more homing lasers overall to do it with, because, like I said, with Exhaust 2, you can quickly run out of them to use when you keep spamming them. However, with Exhaust 4, something like this becomes much more viable in my opinion. So, keep going on here. The next one we're going to have, in my opinion, probably the best one, which is the upgrade, where you create 2, like usual. However, on Ravage, you also create 2 more, and again, these still also go to your hand. And with this setup, you can potentially Ravage the opponent just about every single turn, which is really nice. Sometimes, with certain setups, twice a turn if you use Selena. So, very powerful overall. And while this might not have the raw generation as maybe some other builds do, like create 3, because I'll be honest here, using the 1 AP in a lot of setups isn't really a deal breaker. overall, like every turn, if you can manage to set something like this in your hand every single turn. However, just the fact that this is an upgrade card, use it once and you get the benefits basically the entire fight, I think make it really, really good. The next one is going to be an X, which consumes all action points and activates based on that amount. So let's say you have 3 action points, use this, you create 3 plus 1 homing laser L's and apply haste to those cards. Haste simply means that it doesn't decrease the action count of the enemy, which sometimes does come to play, but I'll be honest with you, most of the time it doesn't right now. There hasn't really been a real big deal with decreasing action counts outside of maybe Judas, and that's really it. So the X-Cost cards are usually always the ones that are hard to play around. However, there is a pretty neat interaction I don't know if people know about, or really I don't really people talk about. So if you have a character like Chizuru, whose upgrade card uses 2 random cards of other combatants, or something like the Forbidden card that uses those 2 random cards in your hand, well, it can use the X card. However, when it uses it, it actually doesn't decrease the cost. I'm sorry, it doesn't actually decrease your AP. However, it activates it as if it did. So, let's say you have 4 AP at the start of your turn, and your Chizuru upgrade card automatically activates this Shining Core. Well, you get those 4 plus 1, 5 homing laser L's, and you'll still have all your AP in, to use, which is totally bonkers when it happens. The only problem is that obviously it's not very consistent that this happens, so this is definitely the one that is most janky and hardest to, build your deck around. However, it can have some amazing outcomes. The final one is another upgrade, which is Shining Core, where you select and create 1 homing laser with their own distinct epiphanies. So this is basically the other homing laser, where you just kind of, have these. They're like ones that are a little bit worse than the actual epiphanies ones that you get from just epiphanizing these overall. Wait, are they worse or are they exactly the same? Let me actually see, because they might actually be exactly the same. I think they are actually exactly the same. So yeah, you just create these. Yeah. Now, I'm not sure how I feel about this one, because you're only creating 1 homing laser, and that's basically it. So, maybe you just pick this one, and you just keep getting this and get more homing laser L's also. Problem is that this costs 1, and if you really want, again, like I said, this costing 1 isn't that big of a deal, but I still feel like if you pick this one, you kind of want it to cost 0. I don't know. This one, I think the flexibility is nice, but I do think that in a world where you're tailoring your deck a certain way, you'll have, another one of these 4 that you'll want to pick instead, especially the Shining Core, if you can pick this one up with the upgrade and the initiation one. Now let's take a look at Cobalt Light, a 3-cost card that does some damage times 4 to random enemies and does intensity damage per a hit. So the epiphanies right now are going to be the first one, a little more damage, and also on Ravage, decrease the cost of this card by 1. This is a permanent cost decrease for the entire fight, so pretty good for longer fights, especially because you get this card 0, and then you keep getting it in your hand, you keep using it over and over again to quickly deplete the tenacity bar and do some more damage overall. Also at 0, it means that I'll start to benefit from cards that, increase the actual damage of 0-cost cards, and because she revolves around basically spamming a certain 0-cost card, this actually makes this one a pretty nifty pickup if you want to go that way. The next one is another interesting one where as Retain, and this is designed to, you don't really want to use this all the time. Well, you can if you can spend the 3. However, you will add 1 hit every time you keep this in your hand up to 5 until it is used. So, keep it in hand for 5 turns. Well, you now have a X9 attack, which will basically just destroy any tenacity bar in the game right now. So a little bit overboard. However, any build or team that has retained synergy is gonna like this one. The next one will cost 2, down from 3. It still does the damage. It loses the tenacity bonus, which I actually think is kind of a big deal, because the tenacity damage you get per hit is actually pretty nifty to have, especially if all of your other cards or smaller cards in your hand can't break the bar. However, you will create a homing laser L for each target hit. So not really that good on boss stages, since most boss stages right now only have 1 enemy. I do know that they said they're gonna add bosses with like parts and stuff, so where parts count as another enemy, this can be decent too. Now remember, it is random enemies, so we can still hit the same enemy all 4 times, but unlikely. So in a lot of combats with multiple enemies, you're probably going to create at least 2 homing laser L's with this. So in those cases, this is actually pretty good. However, I would say for, I think, your general purposes, this one is not quite it, at least for the current boss we have right now. The next one only costs 1. However, it does add 1 hit for each homing laser in hand. So it loses the X4. It also again loses the tenacity bonus. So this is more of just a big burst attacker, where, you know, since you're gonna just be spamming your homing lasers and then getting them back all into your hand with tenacity break, you use this. Let's say you have 8 lasers in your hand. Well, you're suddenly doing this times 8, which is actually times 9, because it's plus, right? So which is pretty nuts. A lot of damage. Again, you do still lose the flexibility of the tenacity break, which I don't know if I'm overrating the tenacity bonus that this card gives you on the other variants. However, I think it's important. Still, if you have enough tenacity break, you think, and you can manipulate your hand and your decks in a way that you can benefit from this. This is going to do some insane damage every single time you get those refills. The final one is weakness attack, which means that it always applies as a weakness, which means that it will always be acting as the strong element or typing. Otherwise, everything is almost the same, because weakness attack is still simply attacking, you know, like tenacity, basically. And on average, you activate it 1 more time. So this is also pretty good. I'll be honest with you, all 5 of them are, you know, good. This is probably the least important card in the deck to really make like the one you really want. So if you kind of miss out on the one you want here, don't really fret about it right now. At least that's what I think. Her final card, which cannot be Piffinized, is Pale Shooting Star. So it will do some damage and will activate at first 3 homing lasers from the draw pile and the graveyard automatically by using it. Now, I do have her at E1, which means mine will do a little more damage and activate 5 homing lasers. So the ones they activate are random. However, this is simply just a, you know, activate 5 random cards that are not in your hand, and do a lot of tenacity damage, and then probably get a lot of those cards back into your hand to use them again to do more damage. So extremely powerful, right? Now, what is even more beneficial though with this card is, because, like I said, you don't really have a way to quickly exhaust homing lasers, which means that over the course of a longer fight, they will kind of clog up your deck unless you have a lot of really strong draw power overall. This card helps you with that a little bit. It's not a, an end-all solution like Renoa's Ballad is. I believe it's Ballad that exhausts all of the ones in the graveyard. However, this one can help by just using them, and then of course you will just generate more on the next turn, or maybe even after you use this, they keep generating more. Again, generation is not really a problem. It is simply more just getting rid of them fast enough when you keep generating a ton of them. So now, let's talk about some cards you might want to duplicate and stuff like that also. Obviously, I think you should try to duplicate maybe Home and Laser overall. So the first one, any of these honestly are pretty good to dupe. Besides maybe the last one, because you probably don't really have to do this 2 times in a turn anyways. However, all the other ones, especially this one, maybe we get this at 0 again, can be a good dupe target to have. As for the Plasma Missile, I would say this one's probably a little bit less important to duplicate. You can't even duplicate the last one because it's unique anyway. But, if I had to and you were offered just this is the only card of hers that you had a choice to dupe overall, I'll be honest with you, like I said, a lot of them I might hold off on. However, the Activate One More Time one, if you have a good Epiphany, can be worthwhile. As for Shining Core, I'll be honest with you, the only real one that might be okay on certain builds is going to be the X one, and that is simply to get more consistency that the random card that picks this, actually uses the X card instead of something else. Because, I'll be honest, this card doesn't really feel that good to cast by itself. Although, even though it is a little bit better than the other X-cost cards in the game, because the Homeless Elves themselves are pretty powerful 0-cost cards itself. And before you consider picking this one right here to dupe this and get 2 custom Hoven Glazers, the mechanics of the current boss is that you can only have 1 of each type of upgrade card. And if you have more than one of them gets deleted, and the other upgrade card has unique on it. So you can't even have 2 of these for the fight anyway, so I would avoid that if you are considering doing that. And as for Cobalt Light, again, this is probably the least important card, so I would avoid duping this unless you have a build that you really want to use one of these for. Like maybe this one right here, but you just spam your Homing Lasers and now you have 2 of these and just do like double the damage overall. So maybe that's the thing you want to do, but something that I might want to stay away from, at least because I think the other ones are a little bit more important. However, what's nice is that I don't think that she is really a dupe reliant character. She seems really strong even without dupes, so you could probably want to use your points more to get rid of her basics and to maybe add another neutral card or something like that. Of course, the forbidden cards are also really good. However, a card I do think you want to try to duplicate on every single build of her is going to be this one, Pale Shooting Star. And this is simply because for 2, it offers a lot of value, and I do think that being able to more quickly get these lasers out of your deck, out of your draw pile, is beneficial, especially with how much generation she has with the lasers themselves. Anyway, hope you enjoyed my little look and guide at Sereniel. Next time, I'll be going over my team for the second half of the Great Rift. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'm Wild Neptune. It's been a good one. Till next time.